In the meanwhile, for those of you who do not know Riva Castoriano, she has had a long international career. She's a PhD in sociology from the École des Hautes Études in Paris. She has lectured at Harvard Department of Social Studies. She has been at the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton, the Wissenschaftskolleg College in Berlin, the Radcliffe Institute, and she's been a visiting professor at the New School for Social Research in New York. She works in multiple languages: English, Spanish, German, Turkish, and of course French. She is a director of research at CNRS, and she teaches at Sciences Po. And she has had a long career, as I said, and her books include Negotiating Identities, States and Immigrants in France and Germany. She has a book, I couldn't get the title, she'll have to fill it in, on dead bodies, transnational dead bodies. Riva, you're gonna have to give me the right title for that book.
Okay, burying jihadis. Yes, bodies between, bodies between state, territory, and identity.
And it's a sort of very clever and novel way to think about immigration of bodies that nobody really wants, basically. So she has such a long list of accomplishments here. She is basically one of the major leading experts in France on the issue of immigration. And as I said, she's been working on that for her entire career. So enough of me speaking. She is going to talk about her new project, or actually completed project now, Negotiating Diversity in European Public Spaces. And I would like to turn it over to her. So thank you all for coming, and Professor Castoriano.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mabel, for this very generous introduction. As you say, it's a long career, so it has many things, but thank you very much. So this is a project that we had. It has been funded by the European Commission within the framework of humanities in European research area. And the idea was that how to combine the empirical studies and normative theory and empirical reality. So this is a comparative project. We have the Britain, French, Spanish, and Norwegian colleagues working all together. And the specificity of us is that we all have one speciality of ism. And I'll get to that. So the two questions that we had in this project was how to reconcile diversity, and that we address the diversity and integration of post-migrants in selected European countries, those in 4 countries of our colleagues. So we first comparative problem is the terminology. We use post-migrants category to please the French ideology, because we didn't want to put ethno-religious communities, since French rhetoric rejects communities. We didn't want to talk about migrants themselves, because we are not talking about the first generation of migrants. So we found an agreement, a consensus among ourselves to call them post-migrants. So the question is then, from this, how we get to a new normativity in relating integration and diversity. So, I missed one, voila. We have 4 isms that we are each specialist of. Multiculturalism is our colleague Tariq Modoud from Britain. Interculturalism is Ricard Zapata from Spain. Transnationalism, I had developed this concept for a long time. And cosmopolitanism is the approach and the theory that our colleague from Norway has developed. So our idea is, so our point of departure is that public inclusion of diversity through changes in patterns, levels, and processes of governing have important implications for how diversity is understood and addressed by public actors in European countries and in a European level. So the complex aspect of this project is that we have the 4 comparative project of 4 countries, plus the European space as a new space. of interaction and governance of diversity. So it is in the study of the question of integration, has its own conception of public space, of diversity, of equality, of solidarity. So of multiculturalism, interculturalism, transnationalism, and cosmopolitanism have all their own understanding of diversity. So all theories in relation to integration and diversity are single theory. But here we started to see to what extent these four isms contrast to complement each other, how relevant their complementarities is relevant. And the main idea is how our empirical research can show the relevance of these concepts. That is how the actors political actors involved in the question of integration of migrants find an echo in their action in these concepts. For this, they just very, whoops. Okay, this is the overview of the concepts. We took the governance levels are multi-level, since we have the local level, national level, and European level, and we have our concepts. For example, multiculturalism multiculturalism concept is related directly to the nation state. The goal is to get into equal citizenship of groups within a nation state. So, and their understanding of equality is based on citizenship, and the unit of analysis is a group, and that is the group solidarity and group recognition. For interculturalism, and we have the importance is that their groups interact on a local level. So the focus of our level is local, is neighborhood, and equality is by promoting contact among these groups. So, and for transnationalism we are talking about networks that are crossing nation states, and it's either group or individual or organizations. The basis of analysis is networks, and the group solidarity is based on many levels, either can be ethno-cultural group or religious group, or whatever the interest is defined on a global level. So the cosmopolitan approach is much more global and European, and so is actually transnationalism. And it's much more based on basic right, universal values, and what Habermas called constitutional patriotism. So universal cosmopolitanism does not pay any attention to group phenomenon, and it's a reflexive approach to citizens' incorporation. So, so the idea is to evaluate these four theoretical approaches empirically. We look for that at institutional discourses, actors' discourses, voluntary organizations' discourses, and to applied policies. And and how they echo this understanding of integration for us in our research. So we picked up two cities by countries, and we chose the cities according to, for example, this is also very interesting to see. For France, we looked only on security issues, social housing issue, they are social phenomenon. Oslo was much more interesting. Oslo and Drammen in Norway were much more interesting in organizations of migrants, post-migrants. Barcelona and Bilbao in Spain, since the public policy, the official policy wants to promote interculturalism, the interculturalist policy was a criteria to choose, and diversity was a criteria to choose the two cities. And for England, we can see that we have the category of non-white, category of Muslims, category of Black, etc., which is much more the multiculturalist approach that is developed, and a category that is officially recognized by British context. So in order to, how do I do this now? Wait, voila. First, let me announce the outline now. First, I would like to develop what we understand by the European public space, and then come to a multi-level governance, because we have the city level, national level, and European level governance of diversity. And then third, we are going to look at the interconnection among these four approaches, how much they are complementary, how much they are opposite, how much they contradict each other, and how much they complement each other. And then I will come then to the empirical results of our research. So, wow. No. Wait, I'm sorry, I missed. Voila. What do we understand by the European public space? In our research, we don't focus only on EU, because we have Britain that is post-EU, I mean former EU member that is not a EU member anymore. Norway is not an EU member. And we have also add to this European space, we have only France and Spain that are EU members, add to this European space, countries of origin of immigrants who, through their action and solidarity and participation, bring their home country in Europe. So we take into consideration this expanded space. This space is constituted by norms, by regulations, by institutions on the one hand, and public expression of belonging and on the other. So, and how they interact and communicate. So public space is composed then by ideas, structures, and their interaction. So on the other hand, European space has a normative power on groups and on states. The normative power on groups is how supranational institutions promote groups to fight, to get organized and to fight against discrimination or racism. And the power or the normative power on states is states find themselves constrained to accept new legal norms produced by norm-giving European supranational institutions, such as European Court of Human Rights, European Court of Justice, in relation to, again, the fight against racism and any kind of exclusion that can be applied to migrants. So, but of course, states are sovereign in their relation to integration and citizenship. So, our fourth perspective on a multi-level, from a multi-level perspective, can bring some changes in terms of, in relation to the overview that we showed before. If we look at multiculturalism, for example, there's a different sensitive, group-oriented approach. The emphasis is on nation states, so it's the importance is on. I should come to the next slide. Voila, and so the emphasis is to revise citizenship and national identity. So, in order to include group identities into this national identity understanding. So the case, it's focused on the nation case, a nation state, but local level for multiculturalism will be basically designed to serve and ensure that the rights and policies formulated at the national level are carried out without due attention to the cultural recognition. So what is done on a national level should be also applied on a local level. So this is what we find in this perspective, multiculturalism in both levels. So with regard to interculturalism, it's, as we saw in the presentation, that is much more local phenomenon. It's a citizenship-making process that is through interaction, through contact of different groups sharing the same space, the same neighborhood, we can come to define a new understanding of citizenship. And that is based on the connection between people with different backgrounds, including nationals and non-nationals, and to come to a cohesive society. So this is the motto of it. So here is the most important is the local level, is face-to-face relationship, and on a neighborhood level. So it does not take into consideration the nation-state level, but it does take into consideration the European level, because the European Union motto was unity in diversity. So this is also what this multi-level public space of interculturalism in a European level is applied also, is projected on a city project, and that is taken over by interculturalist approach of city. So transnationalism, well, transnationalism recognizes multiple links and affiliations because migrants are connected to their home country and to the country of residence, and within the European space, they are connected through European networks through Europe. So they are connected between the country of settlement, the country of origin, and based on any kind of solidarity, identity, they are connected to the people sharing the same history, the same experience of immigration, or the same references, linguistic, local, national, throughout Europe. It has a multi-level governance in the sense that you can have groups that are organized on a local level, they expand their solidarity and organization on a national level, and also on a transnational level. And of course, with the European context on a European level, bringing in extra European countries into European space. So the cosmopolitan is much more, multiculturalism and interculturalism seems like normative discourses or normative approaches, but transnationalism is much more based on migrants' experience, and it comes as a sociological reality of migrants' life. But cosmopolitanism is the most normative because it's much more discourses on human rights, moral universalism, and democratic community. So it embraces all the multiculturalism, interculturalism, but much more on a global level with a global reference. So now the question is how these four are connected, and is there any connection among themselves or not? Are they in contradiction or in tension or in complementarity? Cosmopolitanism is in tension with multiculturalism, obviously. Multiculturalism is group-oriented, cosmopolitanism rejects groups. So multiculturalism gives value to ethnocultural group identification, and that can change the national understanding of citizenship, but cosmopolitanism brings a universal value. Multiculturalism and interculturalism are in opposite, are complementary, because interculturalism starts its understanding of dialogue or contact, face-to-face contact among groups. So that means that it recognizes groups that are created by the multiculturalist approach and brings them face-to-face on a local level. So transnationalism appears as a consequence, as an outcome of multiculturalism. Since groups are organized on a local level and they are organized on a national level, they extend their organization and solidarity on a trans-border level that is more European and global. So, but transnationalism relates to cosmopolitanism because they are European and global. They base their analysis on Europe and globalization, but they are in tension because transnationals can reinforce the ethnocultural or ethno-religious identifications such as diasporas, but then they are in opposition with the understanding of universal understanding of cosmopolitanism. So, but on the other hand, transnationalism are two levels actually, on a group level and state level. Of course, here the state level transnationalism, that is diaspora politics, transnationalism of states, are not included into this analysis. So now let's come to the fourth aspect of our research, that is the empirical results. So as I said, we interviewed like 75 organizations in 4 countries, in 8 cities. We interviewed voluntary associations with civil official organizations, NGOs, and some local organizations, national, local NGOs, and voluntary organizations. So first, it was very interesting to see that all discourses of voluntary organizations, leaders of voluntary organizations, rejected systematically the term of integration. There is no such thing integration that is related to immigrants or post-migrants population that we studied. Integration for them is for the first generation, but you cannot talk about integration about people who have been living in these societies, in these countries, for 2 or 3 or even 4 generations. So integration, if we talk about them in terms of integration, that means that we are targeting them, that we are excluding them, and that we are trying to bring them in. So this is, they reject this term. So for Spain, France, and Norway, integration is to associate integration with cosmopolitan approach is fundamental to human rights. It seems contradictory, but it is not, in the sense of they are already into that. So they are a part of this cosmopolitan understanding of human rights. So they are a part of the society too. To target them through integration is to reject this fundamental right that of their presence in these countries. All four concepts are present in the discourses, but they are not explicitly said. Nobody will say, yes, we apply multiculturalism, yes, we apply interculturalism, but we know that each country has a priority on one ism. Like Britain has an official discourse on multiculturalism, Spain on interculturalism. So it is, of course, UK multiculturalism, interculturalism, and discourses on cosmopolitan, according to the results, the interviews. So all in France, all four approaches are there without naming them. Of course, France will never talk about multiculturalism, which will be rejected, which will be assigned to an Anglo-Saxon approach that is recognizing communities, and even public authorities and voluntary association leaders will reject the term. Interculturalism is the term used by the Spanish official policy that is wishful thinking for everybody, for all four countries. And multicultural perspective is adopted, and transnational perspective through dual citizenship is adopted and claimed by Norwegian organizations. So how does this come into the interviews according to countries? In Britain, multiculturalism not only is an official until 2011, when Cameron said that it's not a state multiculturalism is dead, but the discourse is still there. And they relate, voluntary organizations, leaders relate multiculturalism to hyphenated identities, which is the basis for a new understanding of a national identity in Britain. For France, there's a total rejection of multiculturalism, the term of rejection of the term of minority, the praise of the praise is living together, which will be connected to interculturalism without naming them, because there is no such official discourse based on interculturalism. And Spain is praising this, is the official discourse, is promoting, is the policy that they are promoting, but the leaders of voluntary associations are very, they express their disappointment because of the gap between discourses and its implementation. There's a praise of this policy, but in the field there is no such thing, because we are not getting to this understanding of making of citizen on a local level. So in Norway, there is a multicultural understanding of recognition, but not necessarily on a group phenomenon, but in the multicultural attitude, a recognition of a multicultural society, and an understanding of Scandinavianism that relate these human rights to multiculturalism. So, sorry. Oops. Maybe I should do this way. Conclusions. There is a tendency to prefer an intercultural perspective based on social cohesion, but also keeping migrants' own identities and bonds to the home country. There is no rejection of transnationalism by the actors. States don't talk about transnationalism either. In France, there is no such issue of rejecting transnationalism, but in the public opinion, there is an increasing understanding of threat, security, and fear because of transnational connections. That is why the connection to the home country is fine, but talking about transnational solidarity is rejected. So fundamental human rights, of course, is the universal discourse that is everywhere. And there we see that there is a high complementarity among the four, because we cannot talk about interculturalism without multiculturalism. We cannot assume transnationalism without multiculturalism. And since multiculturalism is in a normative perspective related to human rights because it's based on equal citizenship, it's also related to, in our construction, of course, to cosmopolitanism. So the objective of this research is and was based on the experience of the political actors, of the leaders of voluntary organizations, of the discourses of official organizations, and on migrants themselves, to come to a new normativity, to see how they perceive these concepts, how it is applied. Does it make any sense in the field, in politics, in policy that are implemented, and see what does really work. So these are the project objective of the project. The goal of the project was to come to a new normativity based on actors' experiences. So we see that we cannot, there is no one single normativity if we take each as a normative value. There's one of them cannot just cover all the complexity of the diversity and social reality in our societies. So that means that we need to think of new concepts for the management of diversity and the integration of migrants, where there is room for complementarity among the four paradigms on a multi-level perspective, that is city, country, and Europe. And we have to work, politics should work more with civil society and other civil society organizations and other policymakers at all territorial levels to develop coordinated strategies for social cohesion, again, on a local, national, and European level. So in my program, it says I should stop in 45. Okay, but I will leave more time for the questions then. I will stop here.
Okay. Let me just get my video on. Okay, thank you very much for that very interesting talk, Riva. And let me see, I'm going to manage the questions. So I think we announced, there was an announcement in the chat by Patricia that we are taking questions. You should write your questions. I'm just looking at, we have quite a few participants. So let me see if I have something. Okay, I don't have any questions yet. If we don't have any questions, let me start, if that's okay, with a question. I've been thinking, since I've been working on the European right for forever, it seems at this point, there's always this discussion about integration, migration, controlling migration, terrifying migrants, security issues, all the things that you're speaking about. And now just sort of thinking about France, actually. And one of the things that always strikes me, since 20 years or more have gone by, since I started this work, and every time I go to France, I see what seems to me like sort of happily integrated. I don't know how happy they are, but I see, and I see people that seem to be part of French society. I see kids in museums who are clearly, not native born. They probably are native born to France now, but they're obviously not of French ethnicity, and they're in the same school groups with the other kids, and they're learning about, whatever museum I happen to be in. So I was wondering, what is the generational issue here with migration? Because it seems to me some of the narratives that, particularly the narratives that some of these right-wing politicians are talking about, they don't seem to be the same narrative, or they don't seem to be referring to the same groups as they were referring to, say, 20 years ago. So I was just wondering, did your study sort of track change, or were you just sort of in the moment you were in? because I'll leave the question at that.
Okay. Yeah, the generational aspect comes very much and very interestingly with the term of integration. The second and third and fourth generation, of course, they don't accept the term of integration. They are not immigrants anymore, even though the difference with the United States that we have here still the terminology of immigrant background. After 2 generations, 3 generations, we are still talking about immigrant background. But of course, they are native born, they were born in this country. And so there was not only in France, in all 4 countries, the term of integration is rejected because of this generational process and the generational aspect of migration. And integration now is like a targeting one population. And this population are, of course, we also targeted our population in our study. When we talked about post-migrants, we talked, of course, of post-colonial migration in majority of Muslim background, of Muslim identity or Muslim cultural identity, whatever you call, or Muslim reference. So when we talk about integration, you say, you are talking about integration, that means that you are talking about Muslims. So this is one way of, the term rejects one inclusion into the society that exists. So, of course, the immigration issue from one generation, for the first generation, it's not a matter of nobody studies anymore. They are retired, they are done. And the second and third generation is the ones who are trying to find solidarity somewhere. That is where transnationalism makes really sense. Not with the home country, like a discovery, like trying to find out what a culture of origin means, or to find other kinds of solidarity in order to escape this exclusion or the understanding of integration or non-integration. And the other aspect is that what about if they find another kind of solidarity that is not necessarily in the home country, but based on a common identity that are going through the same kind of experience throughout Europe. And that's also, we come to a transnational, and this is also a phenomenon of the second and third generation. And changes the whole discourse of immigration, that integration becomes related to security. So this also gets into a targeting one population. And this is what we see from this research, that we have to be very careful with the terminology in order, the inclusion is not just policy, is also terminology.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the participants? Because I think there's a sort of lot on the table here.
Where do you see the questions? You don't.
They're in the question. I don't think you can see them. I don't think you
but
can.
There's no question.
But it does make me wonder, I could see in Italy, which I've kind of shifted my attention to these days. In Italy, you do have the issue of the boats landing in Lampedusa or on the east coast of Italy. And, there is an issue there that's very tangible, material, and real at the moment. But I'm a little perplexed as to even why this is an ongoing discussion among some of these other right-wing political parties, particularly listening. I'm just not sure how this is a winning issue so much anymore. If there isn't I could see when in 2015, when you had the events in France, the security events in France, and I'm just sort of mulling over the whole thing. As I said, I'm not an expert on immigration by any means, but I'm more interested in it. I'm more an expert on how it's used as a sort of political tool, but not how it actually works itself out. So I'm just kind of wondering who anti-immigrant, discourses would resonate with, I guess.
You are right, because we are in the middle of all this. To what extent all these extreme right parties are using immigration as an issue. Are they talking about the second generation, the third generation who are there, or the new are that are coming because of the wars, because of, there's a whole confusion of between asylum seekers, refugees, immigrants, economic refugees or political refugees, because they are coming from the East, from these countries that are, you know, that leads the extreme right parties to develop a rhetoric on who are we, who they are, how, you know, the compatibility, or etc. So people who are coming to the Italian coast, French coast, Spanish coast, but mainly also to Greek coast, are coming from the south and the southeast and the Middle East, and all this population on which all these extreme right parties have developed their rhetoric of exclusion, like, you know, on Islam, on religion and Islam mainly. And so the fear is that this population will come and there will be a demographic change. There will be a security issue because of this transnational question, because transnational refers also, of course, to terrorism. And so there's a whole, you know, there are a lot of things to nourish their discourses, their rhetoric, and their politics. So you know, for example, when the war in Iraq brought all these Syrian refugees to Turkey, and the European Union gave 3 billion euro to Turkey to keep these Syrian refugees there in order not to have them in Europe. Why not? Angela Merkel got 1 million Syrians, and then there was the whole crisis, how the other countries, how to dispatch in other countries, how the other countries have to develop, you know, any kind of refugee policy. So the issue becomes, because of these flows, a border issue of the European Union and within the Europe. So these extreme right parties are using immigration and Europe in order to define, you know, the national identity, national rhetoric, us in terms of as a rejection of immigrants and Europe. Brexit is one of them. So thank God Brexit. Yeah, Brexit is a bad experience for the results are not great for Britain. So the other countries are not talking about Brexit anymore. Marine Le Pen forgot about Brexit.
But he talks about Brexit.
Yeah. So I think they are connected in the same way. The rhetoric is connected, the narrative is connected. So it brings, you know, to what extent it's related to reality, but it brings a reaction into party politics. But not only that, look what is going on in France. Now everybody is saying that all what is going on in France is serving Marine Le Pen, which is an extreme right party. So it's not just immigration, and there is no immigrants walking in these demonstrations at all.
I know. I do think that, well, we want to talk about French politics too much, but I never thought it was a good thing to have a sort of Rothschild banker lead a country that, you know, is sort of has some of the highest negative reactions to globalization and capitalism, whether or not they have globalization and capitalism there. So we're sort of getting the outcome of that now, but it probably will help Marine Le Pen, who is actually has sort of shifted her discourse to more of a workerist discourse, among other things. But I'm sort of I'm always perplexed by the fact that you know, it seems to me that the EU, one of the things that the EU actually could do, supposedly, is effectively come up with what I mean, I've written this in many places, with a plan for migration that meets human rights, you know, not guidelines, but the norms of human rights, and also somehow manages to be fair and just to the people who are actually on the ground that are, you know, in these countries who are complaining about this. And I find it sort of puzzling, and have sort of had this argument with people who actually, you know, study EU, you know, why after all this time, this is not a new issue, the migration issue, immigration, there's always some reason that there's immigration. Why has the EU, you know, basically, it never really comes up with a plan that works in many ways, or it seems to stay back from it. I mean, that's kind of like, I don't know that maybe if anybody in the audience has an answer to that, but I've always found that puzzling, actually. It seems to me that the question of immigration, refugees, is basically a transnational, trans-European question. And if you really care about human rights, you should be able to come up with something that works, again, that satisfies both dimensions of that problem.
There is
That's
no
more
one.
of a comment than a question.
Yeah, but you are right. But there's no one common policy on there's no one immigration policy. There's no one integration policy. There's no one citizenship policy. So in this sense, there's no such thing as Europe or European Union. But then the question comes because of the free circulation. When you have, for example, people coming from Eastern Europe, from Bulgaria, Romania, Lithuania, all these countries are member states. But when they come to another member state, it becomes an immigration issue or not. You know, talking about refugees coming when you are Ukrainian and then you are coming to all the policy of asylum seekers changes to welcome the Ukrainians. Is it a refugee policy or not? Is it for, you know, so again, here there are many dividing lines between who can be considered as, you know, it's causing a problem, quote unquote, within Europe or not. So that is why there is no an agreement on immigration policies. States are sovereign and they maintain their sovereignty. If not, you have extreme right parties to decide for the states. So there is no such thing, a common understanding of these issues on the European space. But on the other hand, this is one of the paradoxes of the European construction and the failure of European construction.
And one of the problems there, multiple, the financial aspect is also pretty amazingly difficult. I was wondering, what do second, and by now there must even be third generation migrants, how do they identify themselves? If I mean, again, this is not an area that I research where I'd go up to somebody and say, who are you? I mean, how do you identify yourself ethnically or nationally? I mean, how do people identify themselves?
In this research, we didn't have this kind of answers or questions, but the transnational question brought that identification that cannot be in contradiction with assimilation, say, with the country of settlement. You can be French, yet we be attached to Morocco, to Algeria. So this, it's not hyphenated, it's a natural process of being all together. So this is or maybe just like a new understanding of a diaspora that will relate people to each other in a different way. But I see from when we were doing this research, unfortunately, we couldn't go to the field because it was COVID. So we did a lot of things on Zoom, but my understanding reading all the interviews was that we are in a stage that forget about all these isms. We are still in the process of assimilation, but we are not going to call it assimilation. That's the best thing for us to be a part of our society, and don't use the term, but consider us as being a part of this society. In the 60s, 70s, we would have talked about assimilation. Today, we cannot talk about assimilation.
You know, I was thinking in comparison to the United States, for example, I think of the European, again, I'm talking here just because I'm a social scientist and I hear people talking and I have a vague interest in this, but I'm not, an expert, and as everybody knows that whoever's on the questioning thing here, who's ever listened in our audience. But the thing about Europe is this proximity. When you mentioned Morocco, like you couldn't, there's a lot of proximity to the sort of whatever the homeland was originally. Whereas in the United States, when people cross the Atlantic, you're pretty far away from wherever you came from, which is actually kind of different from people who came from places like the Dominican Republic or the sort of, southern migrations from Latin America or Puerto Rico is part of the United States. But those places are closer and people can go back to them. Haiti, all those places, and Jamaica. And, you know, so you could sort of feel both Latino, Latinx, or whatever the phrase of the day, and you can feel American, and you can have something similar to what's going on in Europe. I mean, that might be a nice comparison. This isn't my, as I said, my field, but that maybe there is some kind of a mixed identity when there's proximity to the homeland, as opposed to like when the Irish and the Italians and the whatever, the Jews came over from Eastern Europe, that you're just so far away that it's hard to maintain that dual identity. Eventually it kind of washes away. Again, I'm
This reminds me of Herbert Gunn's article on symbolic ethnicity. How, you know, even distance doesn't matter, but what you keep from your ethnic identity in terms of that becomes a symbolic identity, symbolic identification. But I think distance and proximity plays a role in the flows of migrants and refugee questions and asylum seeker questions, rather than, you know, immigration and maintaining ties with the home country. For example, Europe is much more open to flows of refugees and asylum seekers because of the conflict. They are much more in proximity here than in the States, where you have not the same kind of conflicts. And for this, geography matters. But in the way you represent the homeland, I don't know how much geography matters, or it does not become a, you know, a far away reference in your imagination that you rebuild, you recreate into within a network that becomes a diaspora, that it has been all the way in history. So geography matters for the flows of migration, and so this is one of the paradox of globalization and universal cosmopolitanism and transnationalism in our thing, because on the one hand, you care about borders. On the other hand, you know that all these things are not taking into consideration borders and are affecting the understanding of the nation state. So there's a paradox here with regard to geography and the new understanding, i.e. the flows and globalization that affect all these society, European societies, not only.
Yeah. Is there anyone in the participant list that would like to put a question in the question and answer box? I feel like I'm having a dialogue.
Yes, we are, but I don't see Q&R. I see here, but I don't see any.
I don't know, you're supposed to have access to that, but there is nothing. Yeah, I mean, it is, it is interesting how, you know, how people are really in a phase where they are defining and you know, trying to sort of, you know, as you say, negotiating diversity in European public spaces, and you know, see what you know, the different ways that people handle that. Somebody actually asked me to sort of give a reflection, and unfortunately I couldn't do it. I was going to be in Rome at the American Academy in Rome, give a sort of reflection on, you know, my experience of sort of being, you know, I mean, as I like to say, both my parents were born in the United States, so I don't feel very, you know, anything but American. But I was sort of asked to join a panel on citizenship and reflect, and I was going to go and reflect, and I just couldn't make it. It was really hard not to make it to Rome, but at any rate, it did make me sort of spend a lot of time thinking about this and thinking about the meaning of immigration, and at what point your identities change, and what does it mean to be integrated today as opposed to what it meant to be, you know, 30, 40 years ago, or 50, or, you know, 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, when many of the immigrants came from Eastern Europe and from Southern Europe. So it is a kind of, it is a, and it seems to me from what you're saying, it is distinctively a somewhat different phenomenon. And I think some of it has to do with the peculiarities of American society and culture and that sort of thing. So I am going to...
Peculiarity of America and peculiarity of our time. because now we
Sorry?
are in much, there's also a difference in time, because the way we are experiencing migration today, it's the term is migration relevant, or are we going to talk more about mobility? And it's totally different. You are not leaving one place to settle in another one, and you can move from one place to another, and that is moreover in the European Union, in European space. So the question here was, to what extent these concepts really make sense today to analyze immigration and diversity, and this, what is the term to be applied today, that is applied today, is social cohesion in our societies. Because of this transnational phenomenon, how to avoid conflict in our societies, and to what extent these concepts are relevant for that.
Yeah, I had a question actually. It slipped when you were talking about, oh, I know. I mean, when you were talking about mobility, I thought about Adrian Favel's long ago book on I forget the name, Eurostars and Euro something or other. But basically, I was wondering, the notion of mobility, is that sort of class specific? In other words, is it easier for people to think of going from one place to the other if they have sort of professional jobs or knowledge-based jobs? Like if you come from, I don't know, place X to France or Italy or wherever, and the only thing you can do is, I don't know.
I agree.
I'm just asking. I can't think of a good job for today that would be a low.
No, I agree. Who is mobile, who is not mobile, who is concerned by mobility and the opportunities of mobility, and who is not. Of course, this is a class, skill, class, the education, and all these criteria that come in to talk about mobility rather than migration. But are we going to talk about migration because in taking into consideration the international reality today? Is it migration, or any refugee, any asylum seeker will be considered as migrant? Or migration will be just to be connected to your origins, then new migrants will come because you don't want to marry outside. You know, there's different ways of crossing borders today, and that is not necessarily that the word migration does not necessarily respond to this reality. Is much more complex, like the question of integration, much more complex. And what we understand by diversity is such a natural phenomenon that I don't know if it deserves any, use in the analysis of our societies.
Well, thank you very much for this talk. I know this was your second. I don't see any questions. We've had a robust audience, but I think that I know this is your second trip, so to speak, to Cornell.
Cornell, yes.
Spent 2 days here and didn't get to speak. Oops, wait a minute. I might have a question here. I have a very long. It's a comment from a researcher from Spain. And the person works, I'm reading it, works with migrants' life narratives and testimonies.
Okay.
So they—
Can I open it?
I'm sorry?
Yes, I opened it.
Oh, you opened it. Okay. I'm not sure why you're able to open it, because usually that can't be. But anyway, so you could read it. What do you think works towards translating? How do you reach the general public, I think, is what she's trying to say here.
It's quite different from, I do agree, rely on using human rights as a framework for migrants' rights, and yet so many people continue to be against migration here and as well. What do you think might work towards translating our findings into accessible material that would reach the general public more broadly? He's right. She or he, yes. Foster intercultural communication across borders. How do you engage policymakers more effectively? I think the trend is for governments to call on scholars to be more vocal, do lots of knowledge transfer activities. But what would be the best way to be the kind of ethical witness we should be? To be the kind of ethical witnesses we should be.
I think she's trying to ask what should we do as academics in this?
You know, all research now, European Commission research are based on this question. Policy recommendations, what should we do, we should be doing? And the project, this project, the objective was, what does really work? Though we are talking about these concepts to study in our studies of migration, integration, settlement, whatever. So do we mean something? Does it mean anything for the people working with these issues? So the question was how to bring these normative questions that we have into actors, political policymakers' experiences. So we see that they don't understand anything. They don't, our concepts don't mean anything to them. So, but what we want to, the way we proceeded is that we develop our concepts. We said, this is what we mean by multiculturalism. Do you think that you are facing this kind of issues? This is what we mean, etc. And then what does really work was the question, was that all this all together should be working. We are doing all this, but nothing just one. So the conclusion here is that we are, let's recognize groups, put groups into interaction among themselves on a local level, increase social cohesion in our neighborhoods, and let them be proud of their origins through transnational connections, and give, recognize the human rights for all these people, consider them as included in the society. So I think that is what does really work, is that, again, another normative view, how all these things are there already all together, and how would they work all together.